Peace without answers, a Buddha reflection. Letting go of the mind's demand to explain life. For a long time, I believed that peace would come once I understood everything. If something painful happened, I immediately asked why. I searched for reasons, patterns, explanations that would make the moment feel acceptable. But slowly I began to notice something the Buddha once pointed to so gently. The question why was not always helping me understand life. Sometimes it was quietly pulling me away from it. And when the question finally loosened its grip, something unexpected appeared. Not confusion, not emptiness, but a quiet kind of peace that did not need answers at all. The question that won't rest. Sometimes you find yourself sitting quietly, perhaps after something small has gone wrong, and the mind begins its familiar movement. Why did this happen? The question appears almost instantly, as if it must. And if you listen closely, you may notice that the question carries a quiet tension. A demand that life explain itself before the heart can settle. Long ago, the Buddha noticed this same movement in the human mind. He saw how the mind does not simply experience events. It leans forward, searching for reasons, trying to climb above the moment and make sense of it. You may feel this when plans fail, when relationships shift, or when the body carries an unexplained sadness. The mind asks why as though the answer will restore balance. Yet the Buddha observed that the question often deepens the disturbance rather than easing it. For a moment, you can simply notice this pattern in yourself. The urge to understand is not wrong, but it carries a hidden assumption. It assumes that peace must wait until life becomes explainable. And the Buddha gently pointed out that life rarely moves according to that demand. The hidden effort of the mind. When the mind insists on answers, it quietly takes on an impossible task. It tries to mentally conquer reality, to place every experience inside a neat explanation. But the Buddha saw that experience is not something the mind stands above. The mind itself is part of the same unfolding stream. You might notice this during a difficult moment. Perhaps anxiety appears in the body. Instead of feeling the tight breath or restless energy, the mind rushes into theories. It searches the past, predicts the future, builds arguments. Yet none of these movements actually touches the living experience happening right now. The Buddha often invited his listeners to look directly at this process. Thoughts arise the same way sensations arise. They appear, move, and fade. The question why is not a neutral tool in these moments. It is an event in the mind, often fueled by discomfort. When you begin to see the question itself as an event, something subtle changes. You are no longer automatically obeying it. The moment becomes simpler. There is a feeling in the body, a movement in the mind, an awareness noticing both. Nothing has been solved, yet something has softened. When the mind cannot accept because. When the mind cannot accept what is, it searches endlessly for reasons. The Buddha often described how suffering grows from craving and clinging. We usually imagine this clinging as attachment to people or possessions. Yet there is another form that hides inside the search for explanation. It is the clinging to the belief that life must justify itself. You can see this clearly in moments of disappointment. When something painful happens, the mind insists that the event must carry a satisfying meaning. It wants a story that protects the sense of self. But sometimes the most honest answer is much simpler. Things happen because conditions come together. Because bodies change. Because people are complex. Because choices ripple outward. Because life is moving. The Buddha recognized that the ego dislikes this simplicity. It prefers explanations that make the self feel special or protected. When the mind cannot accept the simple because, it continues asking why, like a child refusing to sleep. It believes the next answer will finally bring peace. Yet peace rarely arrives through better reasons. It begins when the struggle with the moment relaxes. The judge behind the question. You may notice something curious when the question why appears. Without it, there is simply an event and awareness of that event. But with the question, another figure enters the scene. A quiet judge stands outside the moment asking for justification. The Buddha observed this subtle split inside the mind. The judge believes it must approve reality before reality can be allowed. In this way, the mind separates itself from life. Instead of participating in experience, it supervises it. Imagine feeling sadness while watching the evening sky. Without the judge, the sadness and the colors of the sky simply coexist. But when the judge appears, the mind demands answers. Why am I sad? What does this mean? Should I fix it? The moment becomes crowded with interpretation. The Buddha pointed toward a simpler relationship with experience. When the judge relaxes, awareness returns to what is already here. The wind moves. The body breathes. The heart feels what it feels. Nothing has been approved or rejected. It has simply been allowed. Dropping why does not mean doing nothing. Many people worry that if they stop asking why, they will become passive. The Buddha addressed this fear often. Letting go of the question does not remove action. It removes delay and confusion. Consider the difference between two responses to anxiety. When the mind asks why, it may spiral into endless speculation. Childhood memories appear. Future worries multiply. The body becomes even more tense. The problem grows larger without becoming clearer. But when attention returns to direct experience, something different happens. You may notice the fast breath, the tight stomach, the restless energy. From there, a simple response becomes possible. You slow the breath. You step outside for air. You rest or speak with someone you trust. The Buddha described this as wise attention. Action arises not from panic, but from contact with reality. The moment becomes workable again. Insight and Awareness Quiz. After you have listened, open the quiz tab. The questions reveal how you interpreted what you heard and invite you to notice the hidden logic in your reactions. Then, share your score in the comments. Listening instead of explaining. Peace comes not from controlling the moment, but from seeing it clearly. The Buddha often invited people to look closely at the body because the body speaks in a language older than thought. Sensations appear before explanations. Tightness, warmth, trembling, fatigue. These signals carry information that the mind often overlooks. When the question why dominates attention, the body's voice becomes faint. The mind searches for stories while the body waits to be heard. Yet when awareness settles into sensation, something quietly intelligent begins to unfold. You may notice this during a difficult day. Instead of analyzing the problem, you pause and feel the breath entering the chest. The shoulders soften slightly. The mind stops arguing long enough for the nervous system to settle. Nothing has been explained, yet the experience has changed. The Buddha recognized this shift as the beginning of freedom. Presence replaces interpretation. Life becomes immediate again. How the question steals beauty. The same pattern appears even during joyful moments. Imagine watching the sky at sunset when a quiet happiness arises. For a few seconds, the experience is simple. Color, breath, and awareness exist together without effort. Then the mind asks why. Why does this feel so good? How can I keep it? The joy becomes a project. Measurement replaces wonder. The Buddha noticed how craving can hide inside appreciation. The moment the mind tries to capture beauty, it loses the ease that allowed beauty to appear in the first place. When the grasping relaxes, experience flows naturally again. You might test this gently in your own life. Notice how quickly the mind turns experience into a task. And notice how quickly peace returns when the task is dropped. The quiet wisdom of waiting. In meditation practice, the same lesson appears again and again. People often sit hoping to feel calm. When restlessness arises, the mind immediately asks why. Why can I not relax? What am I doing wrong? The Buddha recognized that this question adds pressure. Meditation becomes another performance. The mind begins negotiating with the moment, trying to earn peace through effort. But the Buddha's approach was simpler. Sit, breathe, and notice what is present. Restlessness is not a mistake. It is part of the living mind. When it is seen clearly without resistance, it gradually loses its grip. Waiting without expectation becomes a form of wisdom. You stop bargaining with experience and begin observing it. And observation slowly dissolves the struggle. When questioning becomes gentle, questions asked in stillness reveal truth. Questions asked in fear deepen confusion. The Buddha never rejected inquiry. Curiosity is part of wisdom. But he distinguished between two very different energies behind the same question. When the mind is agitated, the question why is often a demand for escape. It wants the discomfort to disappear immediately. But when the mind becomes quiet, the same question can become spacious and patient. You may notice this difference in your own life. During panic, the mind searches frantically for explanations. Later, when calm returns, insight sometimes appears naturally without effort. The same situation looks different from a place of stillness. The Buddha encouraged cultivating that stillness first. Understanding grows more clearly from calm observation than from urgent analysis. The moment before the story returns. When the question why loosens its grip, something unexpected happens. The mind does not immediately replace it with a better explanation. Instead, there is a brief gap. In that gap, the familiar story about who you are begins to soften. The Buddha saw that identity itself is partly built from narratives. We tell ourselves who we are, where we are going, and what our experiences mean. These stories help organize life, yet they are not the same as life itself. Sometimes circumstances disrupt the story. A loss appears that does not fit the plan. A change arrives without warning. The mind scrambles to rebuild the narrative but cannot immediately succeed. In that moment of uncertainty, awareness remains. Breathing continues. Life continues. And a subtle realization appears. You are still here even without the story. When the story breaks. Many people experience this quietly during difficult periods. The explanations that once guided life no longer feel convincing. Old goals lose their urgency. The future becomes uncertain. The Buddha recognized that such moments can feel frightening. Without a narrative, the mind does not know where to stand. Yet he also saw that these moments contain a hidden freedom. When the story pauses, experience becomes immediate again. You are not comparing the present moment to an imagined future. You are simply responding to what is here. The weight of identity loosens, even if only for a while. This simplicity can feel unfamiliar, but it also carries relief. Life continues without needing a perfect explanation. Presence beyond the story. When the self loosens, awareness remains clear and open. The Buddha often described the self as something that forms and dissolves within experience rather than standing outside it. When stories fade, awareness does not disappear. In fact, it often becomes more vivid. You might notice this during a quiet walk after a confusing day. Without the usual narrative running, the sounds of the world feel sharper. The body feels lighter. Attention rests naturally on the movement of life. This does not mean stories never return. They will. The mind organizes experience by nature. But once you have glimpsed the space beneath the story, something changes. You begin to see narratives as useful tools rather than absolute truths. The Buddha called this freedom from clinging. Not the rejection of thought, but the ability to release it. Feeling without translation. When the story loosens, attention often moves downward into the body. Sensations become clearer. Emotional pain appears not as a fixed identity, but as living energy moving through the nervous system. The Buddha encouraged meeting experience at this level. Tightness in the chest, warmth in the face, heaviness in the stomach. These sensations arise before the mind labels them as grief or anxiety. When they are felt directly, something remarkable happens. The energy begins to move. Emotions rise, change shape, and gradually pass. But when the mind immediately translates them into stories, the movement slows. The experience becomes frozen by interpretation. Allowing sensation without translation does not make pain pleasant. Yet it makes pain honest, and honest pain tends to flow rather than stagnate. The humility of not knowing. Another quiet shift appears when the mind stops demanding explanations. You begin to notice a subtle humility growing within awareness. The Buddha spoke often about this humility. The mind realizes that reality does not exist to satisfy personal understanding. Life unfolds through countless conditions beyond the reach of individual control. Accepting this does not weaken the mind. It releases the burden of constant judgment. Moments are no longer labeled as failures simply because they are confusing. Experience becomes something to meet rather than something to evaluate. This humility softens the heart. Compassion naturally grows as well. When you see how fragile stories are, you recognize the same fragility in others. Everyone is navigating uncertainty while trying to hold their narrative together. Understanding this invites patience and kindness. Returning to the simplicity of being. When grasping relaxes, the mind rests naturally in freedom. In the end, the Buddha pointed towards something very simple. Life does not need to be conquered by thought. It only needs to be seen clearly. When the question why relaxes, the judge steps aside. Experience returns to its original simplicity. There is breathing, sensation, movement, sound. The mind responds when needed and rests when it is not. Peace does not arrive because every event becomes understandable. It arrives because the struggle to control the moment has ended. You discover that awareness itself is steady even when life is uncertain. And in that quiet clarity, something gentle becomes visible. Life does not need constant explanation to be lived wisely. It only needs attention, patience, and the courage to remain present. This is Buddha Reflections, where philosophy, insight, and lived experience meet to explore mind, impermanence, and release. The conversation doesn't end here. Visit the quiz tab and share your score in the comments. Thanks for your time. It's been a delight. What should we explore next? Comment, share, and save your insight. Subscribe to Orbital Dharma and keep your thoughts bright.